name is Mercedes Cruz Sandoval, and I started teaching at Miami-Dade right at this campus, where the action is, 42 years ago. I'm a cultural historian, an anthropologist, but I enjoy history very much. And I'm going to tell you something about the situation in 1960, when the events that we are going to discuss here took place. First of all, I want to recommend you something. Please take history courses. Otherwise, you are amnestic. And you live in the most important democracy the world has ever produced, and it is in danger. Because if the citizens are not informed, our democracy is in danger. You know where? No place in the world human live better than in Miami. You hear me? Or Black American live better than in the United States. And I urge you to defend this democracy. Even though sometimes I have felt, a little bit segregated, there is nothing compared to segregation here to what happened to me in Cuba. Somebody picks me up, put me in a helicopter in Havana, I will be in jail in 2 hours. You hear me? And remember this, you don't have human rights. Human rights are not universal. You don't have them in your DNA. Some societies give human rights to its citizens. Well, anyway, now I will start with 1960. 1960 is a crucial area because it was in the middle of the Cold War. Of course, if you don't know history, you don't know what the Cold War is. The last century, the 20th century, was a century that we could say that is characterized by very important ideological clashes. Ideological clashes are sort of a worldview, that is tinged with political ideas of what the rule of the government should be like. On one side, you have the fascists, who are right-winger, oriented toward the past, and is better represented by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. And on the other side, you had communism, primarily represented by the Soviet Union, which is the worst representative of anything that has to do with freedom. But anyway, that's another story. And those clashes lasted practically until the end of the last century. It was unfortunate because it took away from mankind the time to take care of our environment and to take care of one of the major problems that mankind has, which is overpopulation. You follow what I'm trying to say? Well, during World War II, fascism on one side and the democracy alongside with communism fought a war, and the war was lost by Germany. You all know that, I hope so, in 1945, okay? But then, right then and there had been a deal to give to Russia part of Europe, which was a horrible mistake. And then it started what is called the Cold War, a confrontation without a war, but confrontation between the Soviet Union and its allies and the so-called free world, which is the European nation and the United States as a leader. That happened in 1945, right? And it lasted until the Reagan era, around the 1980-something, when finally the Soviet Union changed. It was a time of great, imagine, I was 8, 10 years old when the World War II took place, and at the time, America, with all of its problems, like Churchill said, with all of its wrongs, is the most rightful place in the world. But anyway, if you bought a radio, it was American radio. If you bought a watch, it was an American watch. We were supreme all over the world. And I'm not a right-winger, by the way. And I'm not one of the good old boys either. But anyway, it was a time of American supremacy, and then it was challenged by Russia. And by a dogmatism, you know what dogmatism is? A belief, that captured the mind of many people, because who doesn't want a better future for mankind? Who doesn't want social justice? I want social justice, but what I have seen in my life has been social revenge. And when they have divided the goods of a country, to give to the poor people, you know what happened? The upper class takes it all, and that's about the end of the game. And after what I saw and I studied in Stalin Russia, Marxism is not the answer, So it was a time of great ideological problem. In 1938, there was a treaty signed in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It was the capital of Brazil. And the American states, the people in this hemisphere, agreed that it would not be permitted to have a communist regime in the Americas. All right, it sounds great. Meanwhile, I'm born in Cuba, and the Cuban Republic was founded in 1902. It was not even 50 years old, and the whole troubles started. For a republic that lasted 50 years old, it accomplished a lot. I don't care what they said. Excellent education. Cuba have Trump in Miami, not because of their millionaires. No. Because the great teachers that we had in the island. I wish that we had them here. And I wish my children would have been trained by the teachers that I had. Okay. Then another, Cuba was an ally of the United States. In essence, we were dependent in the United States. And the United States had too much power in Cuba, and I clearly criticized that. I was a student at the University of Havana from 1950 to 55, and I was involved in every trouble there was. Because I'm old now, but I was young, I was a troublemaker. But anyway, I belong to the independent of Puerto Rican movement, and God is so merciful that I married a Puerto Rican and had a civil war with him. We practically killed each other for 12 years. Then we went to live in Puerto Rico, and I found out that the only person that wanted independence of Puerto Rico was me. The Puerto Rican family were all for the status that they have right now. But anyway, what I'm trying to say, there was that confrontation between the West and Stalin. Stalin killed more people, I don't know whether you know that, than Hitler. His own people. And I'm not saying that for propaganda's sake. Read a book called
Gulag Archipelago.
Read it. You know what? Because you want to make the right choices. Because you cannot let this country down. I'm glad that this country is incorporating the experiences of other than the Anglo-Saxons. But I don't see why they have to be separate. I want the story of the Hispanics in this country, which, by the way, we discovered, but anyway, that's another story. But to be integrated with the rest. And the same with the black people. It's part of American history. Separation doesn't take us anywhere, make us weaker. But anyway, in that situation comes the phenomenon in Cuba, coup d'etat, sponsored by an American company, but I don't want to get into that. And a revolution against an illegitimate government. And then comes the Robin Hood, according to New York Times, that is Fidel Castro. I know Castro from the University of Havana. Castro is a gangster. Plain and simple, I know him very, very well. Okay. But anyway, in that situation, Castro takes power. And the word is spread that he's going to take the parents' right over their children. That had an impact on the mind of Cubans, because Cubans, like all Latin and like blacks, the most important unit is the family. And they are afraid of that their children were going to be sent to Russia, like it happened in the Spanish Civil War, and afraid that they were going to be turned into communists, and the parents wouldn't have any power over their children, which happened. They were forced to send them to la Escuela de Campo, and they established military services for the boys. Then it started this odyssey of the greater exodus in Cuban history. By the way, and this is my last word, Cuba was a country of immigrants. And since Castro got to power, have become a country of immigrants.
Okay. My personal experience as a Peter Pan, and I do not like that term, but I will use it, Pedro Pan. is intertwined with the truth about the real history about this event. First, I'll cover my personal experience so you get a feel of what it is for a human being to undergo what we went through. And finally, I will share with you the real reason and why this movement started. Mid-December 1960, Christmas holidays from school. I'm at home. My parents leave the house to go to a meeting with Mr. James D. Baker, the principal of my school in Havana, Ruston Academy. And when they return home, my mother says to me, Celita, I was 17 years old. Celita, you have to leave Cuba and go to the United States. I said, no, mother, no. I'm not going to leave alone. She says, no, you're not leaving alone. You have to take your 8-year-old brother with you. I said, oh, mother, no, we can't do that. Well, you must. Mr. Baker has informed us that the school and all private schools in Havana are going to be taken over by the government. So education will no longer be, private or free or anything. And he has the means, by his contacts with the American Embassy, the U.S. government, and a contact he made in Miami to have you and your brother get your paperwork expedited and leave. So that was it. That was the end of that. We packed our suitcases. My brother, who was 8 years old and had been hearing all this environment that Dr. Sandoval mentioned, which had the adults and all the families very excited and constantly talking about it. And people think children don't listen. Well, my 8-year-old brother said, I want to leave. And he didn't know what he was saying. We packed our bags. I got a brand new winter coat because we're coming to the north. It's going to be cold. So did my brother have a very nice little coat. And my mother, very foolishly, I don't know why she ever did this, sewed some money into the lining of her coat, of my brother's coat, because we were coming here. We had a lot of clothes, but we didn't have a cent. We were not allowed to bring any money. So fortunately, they didn't search my brother and he got through. But as we left Cuba, I never forget this, and I really don't like talking about it very much because just thinking about it makes me want to cry and feel very emotional about it. I'm holding my brother's hand, and he finally realizes what it means for him, an 8-year-old, to separate from his mother. And he started crying, something that I've never forgotten to this day. When we were when we arrived in Miami, we were then separated. He was holding onto me for dear life, but at the airport we became separated because my brother went to live with an aunt of mine, my mother's sister, and I was picked up by Catholic Welfare Bureau representatives to go to Assumption Academy, then an orphanage, then a boarding school in St. Augustine, Florida, where I did graduate from high school, then another orphanage in Washington, D.C., where I attended the Catholic University of America and graduated and got my education to have the profession that I'm so grateful to have been able to have served at Miami-Dade College and other places. But the reason why Mr. Baker started this program, because when years passed, I went to interview him because I was very concerned about the name Pedro Pan, which does translate into English as Peter Pan, which the connotation of that is sort of like a flight to fancy of a child who's going to live in the land of boys and fight pirates and win and run into a crocodile. And that really, with what I've told you, I'm sure you do not, when you hear the words Peter Pan, there is no connotation about what really happened and the emotion of separating the Cuban families as this program did. And I'm very fortunate, and I'll be forever grateful, because I escaped Cuba, And all my family escaped Cuba, but there were many families that did not, that remained separated throughout many years. I went and interviewed Mr. Baker when he was an older person. He was living in Smyrna Beach and teaching there at the community college. And I said, Mr. Baker, why has this happened? He says, well, I really don't know either, Celia. I don't understand why this name is the one that has become popular to define this movement of unaccompanied children of over 14,000 who left Cuba. I think it's the second or third largest massive exodus in the history of unaccompanied children leaving any country. And I'm sure that many of you have been seeing TV and coverage of Syrian refugees and all other natural phenomena whereby there are mass exodus from countries, escaping communism, escaping famine, escaping war, escaping terror. And you may think that our exit from Cuba was not as dramatic, but it was terrifying. There was a great deal of fear, a great deal of uncertainty for us, the ones who were experiencing it. And Mr. Baker said he did this, he established these contacts and started this program in Cuba because the parent of one of the children in the school had started anti-revolutionary activities against Castro. And he approached Mr. Baker and said, Mr. Baker, I'm so worried, my son, he's about 12 years old, and I'm so worried that something might happen to me and what's going to happen to him. And with that, his idea, the idea to help this man get his child out of Cuba is what was the seed of this movement. And in Cuba, there was a network of people who worked to provide paperwork and legal papers because these children were not illegal immigrants as you would have them classified. We all had papers, we had visas, and that network was totally illegal in Cuba to obtain these visas for the children. And a number of people who participated in it ended up in jail, among them Polita Grau and her brother. And it was a difficult thing to do. But in any event, he said to me, Celia, this program should be known as the program to save Cuban children from communism. And if you hear this name, it gives this whole thing the courage that parents had to have to separate themselves from their children. The courage that Mr. Baker commented on the courage that the Cuban children demonstrated once here, alone, and yet they behaved, according to their education and value system to try to further their education, to work hard and succeed. And I don't want to go beyond the time allotted, but because of this program, in spite of whatever hardships I may have endured and my brother endured, I am forever grateful to Mr. Baker for having given me the opportunity to live in freedom. And I'm forever grateful to the United States government for helping to support us through their funding. And I'm forever grateful for my parents, particularly my mother, who practically lost her mind when she had to live a year and a half without me and my brother being, in Cuba. So this remains as an event in my life history that I don't dwell upon it, but that I believe any opportunity that I have to set the record straight. And if you take a message from my remarks today, it would be that this was a program to save Cuban children from communism, and thus why things happened as they happened. So thank you very much.
I know how the name Pedro Pan was created. It was first used by Gene Miller, who was a reporter for the Miami Herald. And I think the story first appeared in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, that newspaper. And it was a reporter that was traveling with a group of children in the airplane, and then he wrote about this, and he said, well, maybe this should be called Operation Peter Pan, or better still, Operation Pedro Pan. And the name stuck. It was Jim Miller, the reporter of the Miami Herald, and the name stuck. I don't think it's a cute name, and I don't think it really fits what we went through, but that's the way it is, right? So that's how we're known. And in my case, Celia, I didn't leave until September of 1961. So unfortunately, I lived through a lot of what the communist government did in Cuba. And that reinforced my parents' desire to send my sister and I away. I was 13 years old, and my sister was 8. We lived through the repression, through the lack of freedom of expression. Our schools, my sister and I attended the same parochial Catholic school since kindergarten. She was 8, I was 13. Our schools were closed. The nuns were forced to leave Cuba. The rest of the nuns in the other Catholic schools were forced to leave Cuba. The priests, most of the priests, the ones that we knew, were forced to leave Cuba. And it got to a point where our parents couldn't send us to school, because in the government schools, in the public schools, they were teaching communism. They were indoctrinating the children. So there was no school that our parents could send us to. So I think that was the last straw. That's what made our parents say, we have to get him out of here. And also there's another thing that we should know. A lot of the people in Cuba, a lot of the parents thought that we would be coming back to Cuba soon, because most of the people didn't think that Castro would last in Cuba long. And look what happened. So it was not a thing that we're sending them away, and if we can't leave, we'll never see them again. A lot of them thought, were convinced that, well, this will pass. They'll start going to school there. They'll continue their education. And then when everything is normal in Cuba, they'll come back. And that didn't happen. Most of the parents did reunite with their children. My sister and I were lucky. It was 9 months only. I know Pedro Pans who had to wait 4 or 5 years, but eventually most of them did reunite with their parents. When I arrived in September 1961, I stayed in a camp in Miami in the Kendall area. We stayed there for 7 days. Then we were sent to Buffalo, New York, to an orphanage. And I say that the first words in English that I learned were with a Polish accent, because all the nuns in that orphanage were Polish. The first thing that I learned was to say, well, I learned something in Polish, which was tak siostra, which means yes, sister in Polish, right? And then we were there 2 months, and then we were transferred to a foster home. And then in the foster home, we were there 7 months. And then finally, we were able to come back to Miami and reunite with our parents. As you can imagine, I won't get into details right now. Maybe after my other 2 colleagues speak, I will be able to get into more details. But life in the orphanage was not easy. All the children there, most of them had never had a family before. They didn't, we couldn't relate. One of the nuns was very nice to me. She used to give me English lessons after dinner every night. My sister and I were separated. She was in one floor, I was in another floor. My sister has other stories to tell. And in the foster home, the family was very nice, very proper, very decent, but there was kind of friction. I didn't feel like I really belonged there. They had a daughter that was 1 year younger than I, and we were in competition for grades, for friends and things like that. So, it it was not that easy. But in the elementary school that I attended, everybody was very nice to me. Again, my sister has other stories to tell, but in general, I just wanted to close by saying that I am very happy, very thankful to my parents for having made the decision, because look what's happening in Cuba now. And I'm very thankful to the United States of America for having made possible our coming here. They funded the entire program. They provided us with the visa waivers. I'm very thankful to Mr. Baker. One of my best friends, Susana Gomez, who lives in Washington, she was met at the airport by James Baker. And James Baker, he did at the beginning go to the airport a lot in Miami to meet the Pedro Pan children. And he also was one of the first foster parents here in Miami. And I'm also very thankful to the Catholic Church because they also administered the program. So this is all I'm going to say right now.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Fermin and Gloria, Tania, Miguel, Daniel, my wife Fanny. I've been married for 43 years and we still talk to each other. I was born in Cuba in 1949 and I came on July 24th, 1962 with the Pedro Pan operation. I came to a camp, Camp Matecumbe here in Miami, and then I was sent to Camp Florida City. About a year later, I was sent to a foster home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was fortunate to be with an American family that had 6 kids of their own who spoke no Spanish, so I learned English pretty fast. I actually had a very nice experience. About 3.5 years later, my parents, we were reunited. We moved to New Jersey, went in the Army, came back, got married, had a daughter and a son, graduated Rutgers University, and we moved to Miami about 15 years ago. We're happy to be here, away from the cold. I'm grateful to my parents for sending me out of Cuba, and I'm grateful to the United States for taking us in. Thank you.
I think that the main credit belongs to our parents. I don't think I could have done it. I had 3 kids of my own, and I don't think I could have been separated from them. And they were very brave. After I think back on the decision, I was 14 at the time, and my father had a friend in Havana. I was not in Havana. I was where the action was, in Santi Espiritus, right in the middle of the island. I saw Batista fall. I saw the rebels come in. I saw the planes go over me, the bombs, the shots. I saw it all. And then 2 years later, the friend that my father had in Havana said, you know, I sent my son, my only son, to the United States. He lives currently in New Mexico with an American family, a foster home. And I want you to send your son to the United States. So for me, it was an adventure, you know, it was, but on the other hand, I saw it coming. The schools were closed. The indoctrination programs were set. I grew up with a first cousin that I never saw again. So I was fortunate. I was very fortunate. I stayed here for 4 days. It was right during the weekend of the Bay of Pigs. So imagine how Miami was. And Matacumbe was not open yet. It was Kendall Hospital, the old Kendall Hospital. I stayed there 4 days, and they asked for volunteers for Orlando. I said, Orlando, that's close to Cuba. I'm going there. So I stayed there for 8 months. It was a summer camp in April, not too bad. But then they closed that camp in October of 1961, and they sent us to Jacksonville, Camp St. John's. And that was right next to the river in the middle of the winter. And the temperature got down to 17 degrees one day. So it wasn't fun. I was there with about 60 other kids, all kinds of personalities, or you can imagine. They were all boys. And in 1962, in June of 1962, they closed the camps. They said, no, we have to close. and we were sent to a foster home. I was very fortunate. I was sent to a foster home in Winter Haven, right near Lakeland. It was a beautiful family, Irish Catholics, and their kids were grown up. And one of the high points of my career was to witness in Mrs. Loney's funeral. I said the Loneys did not read the gospel. The Loneys lived the gospel because they actually took two of us in, where all their friends at the parish used to say, "You're crazy, how can you take in two Cuban teenagers who spoke no English," etc. 15 months later, I reunited with my parents. Some of my friends never did. And the rest is history. I stay here. Was fortunate to go to the university. And of course, Miami-Dade College is the place, North Campus. The only game in town at that time, then UM, and finally FIU. But I want to give credit to an individual that has not been mentioned today, and that is Monsignor Brian Walsh. Monsignor Brian Walsh ran Catholic Welfare Bureau at that time in Miami, and he was the one that united with Mr. Baker and the State Department, was one of the main pillars of the operation. And he was the one that protected us here and took care of us. Just wanted to finish by saying that I think most of all has done very well. The record speaks for itself.
Could I say something about Monsignor? I was very fortunate to have met Monsignor Walsh also. And I can say, and I have seen, there are interviews with him online. And I have interviewed people that used to work with him. And his main thing was to take care of the children here. So yes, I do agree with Julio that he also was a very special person for all of us, Pedro Pans, in addition to Mr. Baker, right?
I would also like to add to that my failure to mention Monsignor Walsh, it was not intentional. I was sure others would speak about him. And it is true that he coordinated the program here. And then it is true that the association that was formed of former Pedro Pans is very much integrated with the Catholic Church and helping Catholic schools and helping children, etc. But the issue is that I wanted to stress the other side of this story, because Ruston Academy in Cuba was a lay, non-denominational school open to all faiths, and Mr. Baker himself was an Episcopalian, I believe. And it is important in the story to also give importance to this side of that particular experience, that this was not strictly a Catholic Church program or movement, that the United States government, that other churches, and that the intent of Mr. Baker, as it was always in his school, was to deal with the freedoms we have now guaranteed in our Bill of Rights, freedom of religion, freedom of expression. So it wasn't strictly a Catholic Church phenomena. And that's why I did not stress it. I figured others would. And I want to make sure that that message gets across.
There is an interview with Polita Grau, one of the ladies that was instrumental in distributing the visa waivers in Cuba, who landed in jail with her brother because of many things that they did in Cuba, including the Pedro Pan Exodus. But anyhow, there's an interview with her, which FIU has online, and she specifies that there was a group of women that used to go all over Cuba, reaching out, telling, seeing who were the children whose parents wanted to bring them out of Cuba. And they reached out to all children, regardless of religion, class of society. So
As
it
a
was,
matter
it
of
was
fact,
something that, yeah.
As a matter of fact, there was a group of Jewish
Yes.
children that came with Pedro Pan.
Yes, Jewish and Protestant children.
I think there's also a very important component of this whole program and the experience of many. And it was that we were motivated and we were supported in making sure that we got educated. In other words, that when we left in Cuba, we left all our material possessions in Cuba, but the education that we brought with us and the education that we furthered while we were here was, I think, something that we have to be very grateful about also. That was, Mr. Baker from his point of view, the Catholic Church's emphasis on education, all the other denominations also had that emphasis, that this is a very important value. And secondly, that in spite of all the hardships, the lack of material things, separation from our country, etc., the whole experience of the Castro government of separating the Cuban family, be it those of us who were in this program or many others who to this day live with separated families, is, I think, just as much an atrocity as anything else that I can think of.
Bueno, as a moderator, I want to clarify something, which I said and didn't end. In Cuba, the belief was that the regime wouldn't last too long. You are students at Miami, there were two treaties. I mentioned one, the Rio de Janeiro Treaty, 1938. No communist system would be permitted in this hemisphere. And then there was also the Platt Amendment, which was not a treaty, was American policy of practically controlling, Cuban relations with other countries. Just have that in mind, because what happened 55 years ago is happening again. If you don't know history, you won't be able to prevent a lot of things and maybe understand them. When you take a look at what is happening in Syria, it's happening to us here. Thousands of people coming through the frontier. I'm not taking any sides. My heart goes for those poor people. After all, I went through something like that, or my people have. At the same time, you have issues of national security. And that's why you should come out from this class. You follow what I'm saying? What? What is going to happen? In an overcrowded world, and you have totalitarian system. Totalitarian system have simple questions, simple answers. And then this country, where practically anybody can become a minority. Minority was a term used in the Constitution for the party that lost an election. Now it is a sexual orientation, it is a gender orientation. You follow what I'm saying? And just think about it, because if we lose this democracy, which is an orchid, it'll never come back. It has never flourished anywhere in the world, except here and in France. I want to thank you for attending this program. I think all of us learned a little bit from it. And whatever learning we get from it is that people are always going to search for freedom. And that not everybody has la suerte in español, as lucky as these people were, these kids were, and democracy ought to be fought for at any cost. We all are looking for democracy all over the world. Let's take good care of it. And thank you.